He grabbed her by the neck in the middle of a bank lobby because of her skin. No alarm had been triggered, no policy had been broken, no voice raised in protest. Just a black woman standing too confidently, speaking too calmly, carrying too much authority in a place where people like her were expected to wait quietly, obey quickly, and disappear without questions. What followed was not just humiliation, but a brutal unraveling of assumptions. A systemic exposure rooted not in one man's ignorance, but in a machine designed to suspect her the moment she walked through the door. But what no one knew, not the guard, not the onlookers filming for spectacle, not the bank managers scrambling to draft statements, was who she really was, or what the consequences of laying a hand on her would awaken. This is not a story about a single moment of racism. This is a reckoning. Stay locked in, hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment with your thoughts and where you're watching from, because the twist you think is coming isn't even close to what's about to break. Vanessa Green stepped into Aldridge Bank on a crisp Monday morning, the kind where the light slices through the city skyline like blades of gold and people move with the illusion of control. Her black heels echoed off the marble floors with the muted rhythm of confidence. She wore a navy trench coat, fitted at the waist, buttoned neatly over a pressed cream blouse. Her curls were pulled back in a low chignon, a small leather folder clutched under one arm. Nothing extravagant, nothing to alarm anyone. She was here on business, a scheduled appointment with a financial advisor named Bradley Kent to finalize a 7-figure transfer from her foundation's account to a public education fund in the South Side. She had arrived early, prepared and self-assured. But even as she approached the front reception, her presence had already become a subject of scrutiny. Clyde Jensen, the security officer posted near the checkpoint, adjusted his stance when she passed. He was a former police officer turned private security, white 50-something, the kind of man whose patriotism was stitched into his uniform sleeve and whose judgments were as reflexive as they were unspoken. His gaze followed her movements with suspicion masquerading as protocol. She offered him a nod. He didn't return it. Instead, he stepped out from behind his station and began following her with deliberate steps. Vanessa, unfazed, reached the reception desk and offered a pleasant smile. "Good morning. I'm here for a 9:15 with Bradley Kent." The woman behind the desk glanced up, took her name, and typed into the system. "Yes, Ms. Green, I see you here. He's running a few minutes behind. Please have a seat." Vanessa nodded and turned to the sleek lounge area near the bank's private suite hallway. She had just begun to pull out her phone when Clyde's voice interrupted the calm. "Ma'am, I need to see your ID." She looked up, confused but composed. "I'm sorry." He stepped closer. "Your identification." Now, Vanessa glanced at the receptionist, who looked away. "Is there a problem?" she asked carefully. "You can't be back here without proper clearance." "It's protocol," Clyde said. His voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the underlying challenge in his tone. Vanessa opened her wallet and handed over her ID. "I checked in at the front desk," she said, maintaining composure. "I'm here for a scheduled appointment." Clyde studied the ID as if it might change under his gaze. "What's your purpose here?" "A meeting with Mr. Kent," she replied. "We've been working on a fund transfer." "You're here to access an account?" he asked. "I'm here on behalf of a nonprofit I oversee," she clarified. "I'm the CFO of Green Futures." Clyde didn't blink. "You'll need to come with me for additional verification." Vanessa's stomach twisted. "Is that really necessary? I've checked in, and I have confirmation emails I can show you. You're not allowed to use phones in the private corridor," he cut in. "Please come with me." There was no room for debate in his voice. People nearby began to take notice. A man in a navy suit peered up from a lounge area. A woman in pearls whispered something to her husband. Vanessa hesitated, glancing again at the front desk. No one came to her defense. She followed Clyde down a narrow hallway that branched off from the main lobby. The walls narrowed, the lighting dimmed, and the sound of her heels was swallowed by the carpet. He led her into a small, windowless room with a table, 2 plastic chairs, and a wall-mounted camera in the corner. She sat, her palms folded in her lap, careful not to appear confrontational. Clyde stood across from her, arms crossed. "I need your phone." "Excuse me. You were recording or attempting to? Bank policy prohibits filming in restricted areas." "I wasn't recording anything," she said, trying to keep her voice level. "I was checking an email about this appointment." "Hand it over." She hesitated, then slowly handed it to him. He placed it on the table and didn't look at it again. "I'm going to contact the branch manager," he said, as if she hadn't already been expected. "Please remain seated." "I'm not under arrest," she said quietly. "Am I?" "You're being held for security protocol," he replied. "Cooperate and this will go faster." Time slowed. She sat in silence as he made a performative show of calling someone over the radio. Her heart pounded, not with guilt, but with the sharp sting of humiliation. She thought about the children her nonprofit served, about the teachers the funds would support, about the dignity she fought for every day. And here she was, being treated like a criminal in a place where her organization had moved millions of dollars. Minutes dragged. Clyde didn't look at her. No apology, no explanation, just suspicion that clung to her skin like smoke. 25 minutes later, Bradley Kent burst into the room, flustered. "Vanessa, I'm so sorry. There was a mix-up," he turned to Clyde. "She's supposed to be here. She's fully authorized." Clyde didn't apologize. "She wasn't on the access list," he said. "She didn't look authorized." Vanessa stood. "Are we still having the meeting?" Bradley's mouth opened, then closed. "We'll need to reschedule," he said. "My next appointment." Vanessa stared at him. "You mean the meeting I arrived early for? The one you confirmed 3 times by email?" She had believed, until yesterday, that the best way to win was by playing clean. By 9 a.m., she was dressed in another sharp suit, her folder neatly repacked, and her hand steady as she dialed Aldridge Bank's customer service line. A polite woman answered, chipper, unaware. Vanessa gave her name, her foundation's client number, and requested a direct line to regional customer care. The woman hesitated, offering instead a generic escalation email. Vanessa insisted. Eventually, after layers of hesitation, she was transferred to a supervisor named Malcolm Tisdale, whose voice had that rehearsed calm of someone trained to nod through disasters. Vanessa explained, clearly and without venom, the events of the previous day. She used words like detained and misidentified and denied service, but never let her tone slip. She described Clyde Jensen's refusal to verify her appointment, the confiscation of her phone, and the refusal to allow her to meet with her assigned advisor. She emphasized the absence of apology, of ownership, of even basic courtesy. When she finished, Malcolm offered a silence, so long it suggested a script being consulted. When he finally spoke, his words felt dipped in tepid water. He apologized for the inconvenience and promised a full review. Vanessa pressed for a written statement. Malcolm declined, citing internal policy. She asked for a formal complaint to be logged. He agreed, but when she asked for the ticket number, he said it would be emailed shortly. She never received it. 2 hours later, she drove to Aldridge Bank's headquarters on Riverside Avenue, a towering, mirrored high-rise that glittered with untouchable wealth. She didn't ask for an appointment this time. She walked straight into the branch and asked to see the manager. The receptionist, a new face, blinked as if unsure whether to call for security or compliance. She picked up the phone and whispered quickly. Minutes later, a tall man in a crisp gray suit appeared from the glass hallway. His name was Martin Feld. He smiled tightly and extended his hand. Vanessa took it, but didn't smile back. They sat in his office, where the walls were lined with meaningless awards and abstract art that whispered affluence. Vanessa retold the story, slower this time, letting each detail land like a small gavel. Martin listened, nodding intermittently, occasionally jotting notes. When she finished, he leaned back and offered a familiar expression, concern without conviction. "I want a formal written apology from your staff," she said. "And I want the name of the security company that employs Mr. Jensen." Martin's smile faltered. "Ms. Green, I understand how upsetting this must be, but I want to assure you that Aldridge Bank values all our clients equally." Vanessa's fingers curled slightly on her folder. "You value my money. You don't value me. Martin opened his mouth, but didn't respond. You have the footage, she continued. You have my client record, which proves I was scheduled. You have staff who witnessed what happened. What exactly do you need to consider this mistreatment? Martin folded his hands. We will be conducting an internal investigation. That's not enough. We're taking this very seriously. You're taking it quietly, she corrected. Not seriously. Martin inhaled slowly, searching for a tone that wouldn't ignite her further. MS. Green, I understand your frustration, but we must also consider employee privacy and due process. I wasn't given either, she said. I was profiled, detained, humiliated, and you want me to wait while you file paperwork? Martin said nothing. Vanessa stood. You have 24 hours to issue an apology and make a statement to my legal counsel. After that, I go public. The words surprised even her. She hadn't planned to say them, but they felt true. They felt earned. Martin blinked, as if realizing the woman across from him wasn't just a client with a complaint, but a threat with a voice. We'll be in touch, he said. She didn't thank him. Outside, the air tasted sharper. She exhaled and walked to her car, each step steadier than the last. That night, her phone rang. It was Bradley Kent. His voice was hesitant. Vanessa, I just wanted to say I'm sorry about yesterday. You had a chance to say that yesterday, she said, and you chose silence. He hesitated. They told me to let security handle it. I didn't want to escalate. You didn't want to get involved. I was caught off guard. It all happened so fast. It didn't happen fast. It happened slowly. And you watched. I'm not like him, Bradley said. I've always respected your work. Then you should have respected me. There was another silence, longer this time. I'll email you a personal apology, he said. You don't need to. She hung up. In the morning, she called her legal counsel. Her attorney, Marissa Doyle, was a quiet storm in a black suit, measured, brilliant, and devastating in litigation. Vanessa laid out everything. The footage she'd recovered from her security app, the logs from her phone, the emails confirming her appointment. Marissa listened, her voice never rising. We have a case, she said. Discrimination, negligence, breach of client agreement. Maybe even unlawful detainment, depending on how far they pushed. Vanessa nodded. Let's do it. That afternoon, Aldridge Bank released a public statement. It was bland, sanitized, and devoid of direct responsibility. They acknowledged an incident involving a valued client, said they were reviewing procedures, and affirmed their commitment to diversity. Vanessa stared at the press release, jaw tight. The bank was strongly discouraging any staff from commenting on the matter, and had requested that all social media accounts be reviewed for compliance with confidentiality policies. In other words, shut up and stay loyal. Vanessa stared at the gray sky and let out a breath that had been trapped in her chest for days. She had followed every channel, documented every offense, asked politely, insisted professionally, and still the weight of justice hadn't moved an inch. So now it was time to shift the ground beneath it. She scrolled through her contacts until she found the name. Kayla Booker, an investigative journalist for a national media outlet, and an old friend from their days in public relations training. Kayla had a voice that could unearth corruption and make America listen. Vanessa hit call. Kayla picked up in 2 rings, her voice groggy but alert. Vanessa didn't waste time. She recounted the incident in crisp, precise detail, every beat exact, every fact verifiable. Kayla listened in silence, asked a few questions, and then said 5 words that shifted the air in the car. I want to run it. By the end of the day, Kayla had confirmed an editor's approval. They needed footage, photos, witness names. Vanessa provided everything. Copies of the emails confirming her appointment, the security footage from her phone's backup app showing the moment Clyde confiscated, timestamps, her legal filings, the official complaint form she had submitted, but never received a response for. Kayla worked fast. She interviewed 2 bank employees off the record who confirmed the story, including the use of internal code terms that marked suspicious customers by demographic shorthand. Vanessa's client profile had been flagged red in a field meant for internal notation. It didn't say why. It just said monitor. The next morning, the story broke. The headline ran on Kayla's digital platform's front page, and within 30 minutes, it had been shared over 10,000 times. Black woman detained in bank despite valid ID appointment. Institution issues no apology. Within hours, national voices picked it up. Civil rights organizations began retweeting the article. Journalists began making inquiries. Aldridge Bank's Twitter account released another statement, this time with marginally stronger language about regrettable miscommunication. But the public wasn't buying it. Hashtags trended. Hashtag banking while black surged across platforms. Vanessa's inbox exploded. Messages from strangers poured in, some offering support, others sharing similar experiences at banks, stores, restaurants. People who'd smiled, complied, conformed, and still found themselves viewed as threats. A college professor wrote, "I know what you're feeling." A nurse in Kansas sent, "I've been in that room too. You are not alone." The words didn't erase the shame Vanessa had felt, but they reminded her that shame was not hers to carry. By the afternoon, Kayla texted again. A video had surfaced. One of the tellers, an intern no one had taken seriously, had recorded part of the incident from their phone when Clyde pulled Vanessa into the side room. The footage was grainy, taken from waist height, but it showed Vanessa's calm voice, her attempt to explain, and Clyde's sharp interruptions. It showed the moment he took her phone from the table. The footage was damning. When paired with the emails and her appointment confirmation, it became irrefutable. Vanessa didn't cry when she saw it. She simply sat still, a rare silence falling over her like snowfall. There, in pixels and sound, was proof of what she had felt, proof that the world often refused to acknowledge. Kayla's network picked up the video. Other outlets followed. National television anchors debated bank protocol, racial bias, customer treatment. Some tried to reduce the incident to a misunderstanding, but the majority recognized the truth. The footage was too clear, too plain. The moment of humiliation had a face now. And that face was not Clyde Jensen's. It was Vanessa's. The one who endured. The one who had done everything right and was still treated like a suspect. That evening, as dusk fell and news vans circled the headquarters of Aldridge Bank, an internal crisis meeting was held behind closed doors. Executives scrambled to manage fallout. Their PR firm drafted a new statement with language recommended by consultants: transparency, commitment to change, accountability. None of those words had weight anymore. Vanessa sat on the balcony of her apartment, sipping tea, her phone on mute. She had refused interview requests for now. This wasn't about exposure. It was about truth. And the world had finally seen it. Meanwhile, Clyde Jensen had been placed on administrative leave. Officially, it was pending review. Unofficially, sources had confirmed he was already under internal investigation, and a review of his past behavior had unearthed multiple complaints of racial profiling at 2 previous job posts. Those had been quietly settled with non-disclosure agreements. He had never faced public consequences. Until now. Vanessa's legal team expanded their complaint, citing a pattern of negligence in the bank's hiring practices and failure to respond to credible reports of misconduct. Civil rights lawyers across the state requested transcripts and offered to collaborate. Her inbox filled with attorneys offering their services pro bono just to be part of the case. That night, as the city's skyline flickered with the amber of office windows and news anchors debated systemic bias, Vanessa opened an email from a woman named Lisa Cortez. She was a senior financial advisor who had worked at Aldridge Bank for 9 years before quitting after a series of conflicts with upper management. She wrote, "I couldn't say anything before, but I saw what they did. I was there when they marked your file. I didn't agree with it. I want to help." Vanessa stared at the screen, heart heavy and still. This was bigger than her. It had always been. She typed, "I'd like to talk," and hit send. The next morning, Aldridge Bank's stock took a noticeable dip. Their investor line was flooded with questions about the scandal. Multiple corporate clients requested account reviews. An entire business account from a national nonprofit withdrew its assets, citing the incident as a breach of trust. It wasn't new, but now it was personal. It was aimed squarely at her name, her work, her dignity. Her foundation's email system was hit with a spam campaign. Bots and anonymous users flooded their contact forms with fake complaints, forcing the tech team to shut it down for 12 hours. Clients who had been long-standing partners received anonymous tips suggesting financial improprieties, completely false, but damaging enough to require rapid legal responses. The attack wasn't just reputational. It was systemic, coordinated, and tactical. Someone wanted her silenced. That afternoon, her office manager forwarded her a letter delivered by courier. It was unsigned but carefully typed, printed on expensive bond paper. The message was clear: drop your complaints, withdraw the lawsuit, stop speaking publicly, and this will all go away. There was no threat of violence, just a promise of consequences. Vanessa didn't flinch. She took a photo of the letter, forwarded it to Marissa Doyle, and locked the original in a secure file. She wouldn't back down, not now, not when the cracks in the bank's carefully managed reputation had finally begun to split wide open. But things only got worse. 2 days later, a local news outlet known for its conservative slant ran a story filled with distortions, quoting unnamed sources who claimed Vanessa had created a disturbance in the bank, refused to comply with basic procedures, and used her status as leverage to intimidate staff. The article ignored the footage, the emails, the documentation. It didn't quote the official statement from the bank. Instead, it relied on witnesses who conveniently remained nameless. The backlash spread like rot. Comment sections turned into battlegrounds. Supporters of Vanessa were drowned out by trolls accusing her of manipulating the media. Public opinion began to split. What was once a clear-cut example of discrimination began to warp under the weight of misinformation. Even allies hesitated. One of her corporate sponsors paused their monthly donation, citing a need to wait for the full story. A school district that had been preparing to partner with Green Futures postponed the agreement indefinitely. The foundation's mission was being undermined by a smear campaign moving faster than the truth. Vanessa met with Marissa and Kayla at her office late that night. The room was dim, lit only by the soft blue glow of laptops and the exhaustion hanging in the air. Marissa had already begun tracking the sources of the smear. Most of the fake accounts originated from 2 proxy servers linked to a known disinformation firm, an entity with quiet connections to high-profile political donors, many of whom had deep financial relationships with Aldridge Bank. The implications were clear. This wasn't just pushback. It was retaliation. Kayla leaned forward, her expression grim. They're trying to rewrite the narrative before the public settles on yours. They know if they control the middle, they control the outcome. Vanessa nodded slowly. Then we take it back. The next morning, they released a new video, a full interview with Vanessa, framed by facts, verified documentation, and commentary from legal experts. The piece was balanced, clinical, and powerful. It went viral in under 6 hours. For a moment, the momentum returned. Civil rights groups reignited their campaigns. A growing number of high-profile voices came out in support of Vanessa, condemning the smear tactics and demanding transparency. But Aldridge Bank responded with silence. They didn't deny the smear. They didn't acknowledge it either. Instead, they filed a motion to dismiss the civil suit, citing insufficient cause and claiming the incident was the result of an unfortunate misunderstanding. Their legal team doubled down on the idea that Vanessa had not been formally detained and that the actions taken by Clyde Jensen fell within the scope of standard operating procedure. Vanessa sat in court, surrounded by reporters and cameras, listening to lawyers twist the story into something clinical and abstract. They reduced her humiliation to a misstep, her identity to a variable, her experience to a technicality. Clyde wasn't present. He had filed for medical leave, citing stress from public harassment. The man who had grabbed her by the arm, who had denied her humanity, who had stood silent as she was shamed, he had retreated behind paperwork and legal shields. After the hearing, a reporter asked Vanessa if she still believed the system would deliver justice. She didn't answer, not because she had lost hope, but because she had learned something harder than anger. Justice, she realized, wasn't a system. It was a war of attrition. One where the side with more money, more influence, more connections could delay, dilute, and deflect until the truth collapsed under fatigue. But she wouldn't collapse. That weekend, a second whistleblower contacted Kayla. This one had worked in the bank's compliance department and provided emails that proved Vanessa's client file had been flagged without cause. The notation system used by the bank included demographic codes that weren't disclosed to clients. Black clients were more likely to receive increased monitoring tags than white clients of equal or lower financial standing. The data was damning. Kayla prepared a new article, this time focused on the broader pattern. Vanessa's case had been the spark, but now they had proof of the fire. The story published Monday morning. This time, regulators took notice. The Office of the Comptroller of the Currency requested a formal review. Congressional aides began circulating memos. Public trust in Aldridge Bank began to erode visibly. Depositors closed accounts. Small business clients began looking elsewhere. Major institutions quietly explored alternatives. And yet, the cruelty didn't stop. Someone leaked Vanessa's home address online. She received hate mail. Her neighbors began receiving flyers accusing her of fraud and anti-American sentiment. A brick was thrown through the window of her foundation's office. The front entrance had been boarded up temporarily with plywood, clean and pale against the dark gray facade of the building. A simple sign had been pinned to the door, written in her assistant's bold, looping handwriting. "We're still open. Keep going." Vanessa stared at it for a long time before unlocking the side door and stepping inside. The air was cool, the light still off, and the office space lay in a strange quiet, almost reverent in its stillness. Desks stood exactly as they had the night before the attack, untouched except for the faint dusting of glass particles that had traveled deeper into the space than expected. The scent of dust, coffee, and something faintly metallic clung to the air. She walked through the open-plan office with deliberate slowness, pausing at each workstation, touching the back of each chair. Her team would arrive in a few hours. Today, they would meet. They would plan. They would rebuild. But this moment, this breath before the next strike, belonged to her alone. In the days since the smear campaign had begun and the lawsuit intensified, Vanessa had felt herself pulled in all directions, by reporters hungry for more, by legal teams coordinating their strategy, by civil rights advocates demanding appearances, by donors requesting reassurance, by communities sending prayers and pleading for hope. And underneath all that noise had pulsed a quiet, deadly fatigue. But here, in the early quiet of a still-standing office, she found clarity. She wasn't afraid anymore. Not of the public, not of retaliation, not even of failure. Because she understood something now. Institutions didn't fear outrage. They feared evidence. And she had it. What she needed next was precision. That afternoon, she sat with Marissa and a newly joined legal strategist named Isaac Ellison, a quiet man with a razor mind and a background in civil litigation. They gathered around the long conference table, now shifted away from the window, and reviewed the legal strategy one more time. They would not only continue with the civil case for damages, but file an injunction requesting court-ordered internal audits of Aldridge Bank's internal client monitoring practices. Isaac had found precedent. In 3 previous cases involving discriminatory financial profiling, similar court orders had been granted, rarely but possible. They would argue not just for justice, but for structural accountability. The goal was no longer just a personal victory. It was systemic reform. Vanessa listened, asked sharp questions, and approved the next steps. The legal machine was in motion, but she knew law alone wouldn't be enough. Public will had to be sharpened like a blade. So she met Kayla Booker that evening at a quiet bistro downtown, far from the cameras and protesters. Kayla slid into the booth with a laptop and a weathered notebook, her face weary but focused. They talked for nearly 2 hours, shaping the next phase of the media offensive. This time, the target would be invisible policies, the digital red flags, the demographic notations, the opaque data systems that banks use to assign risk based on patterns they never disclosed. Vanessa had always known these systems existed, but now she had names, policies, internal memos. It was time to pull them into the light. She agreed to a long-form documentary piece with Kayla's network, giving exclusive access to internal communications, victim interviews, and whistleblower testimonies. The production would take 2 weeks. In that time, she would gather more. She would travel. She would speak directly with other victims. She would build a coalition not of voices, but of stories, facts, and proof. Meanwhile, the attacks continued. Online trolls released a manipulated audio clip designed to discredit her testimony. It was quickly debunked by audio forensics, but the damage lingered in headlines and comments. Anonymous threats escalated. One morning, she found a bullet casing in her mailbox. Police shrugged, citing lack of witnesses. She reported it. She documented everything. She didn't flinch. Her team continued showing up. Donations slowed, but did not stop. A rival bank reached out quietly, offering their full services and a public endorsement. She declined for now. This wasn't about switching allegiances. It was about confronting the disease where it lived. On the 7th day after the attack, Vanessa stood on a stage at a community fundraising event organized in solidarity. The auditorium was full. Educators, activists, parents, students, all seated, all waiting. She stepped up to the microphone without notes. Her voice was calm but cut through the silence like a blade. She told them what happened, not just to her, to others. She named names. She quoted policies. She explained how quiet, coded language had been weaponized against whole communities. She didn't speak with fire. She spoke with steel. When she finished, the room stood in unison. Not cheering, not clapping, just standing, silent, committed. That night, she received a letter. This one was signed. It came from the executive assistant of a senior vice president at Aldridge Bank. The message was short. The executive wanted to meet. In private. No lawyers. No press. Vanessa didn't respond immediately. She forwarded the letter to Isaac and Marissa. They advised caution. She agreed. But the letter was confirmation. The institution had felt the shift. They had gone from dismissal to defense to desperation. It had been 71 days since Clyde Jensen grabbed Vanessa by the arm in Aldridge Bank's lobby. 71 days since she was publicly humiliated in a building where her name was on an appointment list, her credentials in order, and her intention simple: move money to help children. In those 71 days, she had been lied about, threatened, stalked, and discredited by strangers and executives alike. But now, with the case finally in front of a federal judge, the tide had begun to shift. The courtroom was packed, press in the back rows, advocacy groups just behind the bar, Aldridge Bank's legal team flanking the defense table in charcoal suits and thin smiles. Vanessa took her seat at the plaintiff's table, her eyes steady, her hands calm, and waited for the proceedings to begin. Judge Martha Breyer, a woman known for her sharp mind and no-nonsense demeanor, entered with a sweep of her robe and took her seat without preamble. The first motion on the docket was from Aldridge's lawyers, a request to dismiss the suit on procedural grounds. Their argument, delivered in calm tones and laden with citations, framed the incident as an internal policy misunderstanding, with no lasting harm, no malice, and certainly no pattern. Their lead counsel, Franklin DeWitt, emphasized that Aldridge Bank deeply regretted the experience, but maintained that Vanessa's detainment had been well within the operational parameters of their security protocol. He used words like standard, unfortunate, isolated. Vanessa listened, her expression unreadable, as DeWitt attempted to reduce her trauma to paperwork. When it was Marissa's turn to speak, the courtroom shifted. She rose without notes, walked 2 steps forward, and began. She described Vanessa's credentials, the nonprofit's impact, the legitimacy of the appointment, and the video footage that contradicted the bank's version of events. She introduced the algorithm used to profile customers, the code unearthed by the whistleblower, and the emails confirming the client flag system. Then she paused, her voice never rising but thickening with purpose, and said clearly, "What happened to Ms. Green was not a mistake. It was the result of a system designed to view people who look like her as threats until proven otherwise. And even then, they are often denied that proof. The silence that followed was different this time. Not discomfort, not tension. It was recognition. Judge Breyer did not dismiss the case. She allowed it to proceed with full discovery, citing a compelling presentation of systemic concerns. Aldridge Bank's counsel looked momentarily shaken, their practiced confidence dented by the turn. Vanessa stood when the session ended, nodding once to the judge, and exited into the blinding light of camera flashes. That afternoon, Kayla Booker released the trailer for the upcoming documentary. It featured clips from the courtroom, snippets of whistleblower interviews, and brief but powerful images of Vanessa speaking at community events, visiting schools, sitting quietly behind her desk. The trailer ended with one line of narration. When the system is built to protect itself, truth must become louder than silence. It was viewed 2 million times in the first 12 hours. That night, Aldridge Bank's internal Slack logs were leaked to a journalist with a reputation for exposing corporate misconduct. The messages revealed a culture of calculated indifference. Executives mocked the initial backlash as social media theater. Legal advisors debated how much money they could afford to lose before public relations costs outweighed settlement risks. One executive even joked about offering Vanessa a job to shut her up with a salary. The screenshots spread across every platform. Hashtags surged. Protesters returned to Aldridge's branches in 5 major cities. Political figures called for independent investigations. Public confidence plummeted. In response, Aldridge Bank suspended 2 senior executives and released a new statement filled with terms like accountability, transparency, and reform. Vanessa read the statement from her office and said nothing. She had learned that words were currency easily spent and rarely honored. The next morning, a subpoena was issued for internal records regarding Aldridge's risk assessment algorithm. Their legal team tried to fight it, but the court overruled. For the first time, the veil covering the bank's data practices began to lift. Behind the curtain, the truth was uglier than expected. The system used a color-coded tagging mechanism, assigning red, orange, or green flags based on factors including transaction types, spending velocity, zip code history, and loosely defined behavior categories. In internal documents, certain zip codes, heavily populated by minorities, were listed as legacy risk zones, a euphemism for historically redlined districts. Vanessa's account had been auto-flagged 3 weeks before her appointment, not because of anything she did, but because her foundation had increased its transaction volume in one of those zones. Her face and credentials simply confirmed the algorithm's bias. That night, an anonymous member of the bank's data ethics team emailed Kayla. They hadn't spoken out before out of fear. Now, they offered something unexpected, minutes from a confidential compliance meeting months before Vanessa's incident. In those notes, one executive had raised concerns about the racial disparity in flagging patterns. The response? Let legal handle it if it becomes a problem. Vanessa stared at the PDF in silence. It wasn't just systemic, it was deliberate. The next court session brought new evidence, including the data logs proving that other Black clients had received identical treatment under similar circumstances. Some had been closed out without notice. Others had filed quiet complaints that went nowhere. Now they had faces, names, voices. Some of them sat in the gallery, watching as Vanessa's case became more than hers alone. By the end of the week, the bank's public stock rating dropped 3 points. Internal memos leaked again, this time detailing crisis planning scenarios. Settlement offers, leadership restructuring. One memo listed Vanessa by name under a heading titled Risk Retention. She was no longer a story to bury. She was a force to negotiate with. Yet, amid the pressure and the chaos, none of them truly understood the magnitude of what they had triggered. None grasped the depth of the woman they had tried to silence, the foundation she represented, or the legacy she carried. That ignorance was about to collapse. On Monday morning, the courtroom buzzed with an unusual charge, reporters bracing for a procedural session that promised to be anything but. Vanessa arrived as she always did, deliberate, composed, unshaken. But beneath her silence simmered a truth she had kept guarded, not out of fear, but because timing was everything. And now the time had arrived. The courtroom filled quickly. Legal teams exchanged tight nods, and Marissa Doyle leaned in close to Vanessa just before the judge entered, whispering, "Are you sure you're ready?" Vanessa didn't flinch. She nodded once. "They need to know." As Judge Breyer opened the session, Isaac stood to introduce a new exhibit, a sealed declaration, unredacted and now ready to be entered into the public record. The clerk received it, unsealed it, and distributed the copies. Franklin DeWitt accepted his with thinly masked impatience, but as his eyes scanned the pages, the color slowly drained from his face. The court watched as he blinked, then looked up at Vanessa with a flicker of something new in his eyes. Not confusion, not defiance, but alarm. Because within that declaration lay a truth carefully kept from the public narrative until now. Vanessa Green was not just the CFO of a nonprofit, not merely an educated black woman with poise and presence. She was the daughter of Theodore Green, the late federal judge whose landmark rulings in civil rights litigation had reshaped portions of federal anti-discrimination law in the late 90s. Her mother, Nadine Clark Green, had been one of the country's first black regional directors of the Federal Reserve, a woman whose name still carried weight in fiscal regulatory circles. Vanessa herself had once been a senior policy advisor on financial ethics reform, a role she left quietly to found Green Futures, a foundation that, until now, had deliberately kept her full background out of its press materials to avoid politicization. In essence, Vanessa had walked into Aldridge Bank not just as a client, but as someone whose legacy, knowledge, and reach extended into the very systems the bank had manipulated to its advantage. She had chosen silence, at first, to let the truth speak through evidence. Now, her name would carry weight that could not be ignored. The courtroom buzz turned to stunned silence. Reporters typed faster. One gasped audibly. Judge Breyer reviewed the document, raised her eyes, and asked Franklin DeWitt if the defense wished to respond. He stammered, searching for footing he no longer had. "We were unaware of these affiliations. They were not disclosed." Breyer cut him off. "She was not obligated to disclose them. Your client's actions were based on her appearance, not her resume." Vanessa rose slowly from her seat, and the room seemed to lean in. She addressed the court for the first time during the proceedings. "For weeks, I was painted as unqualified, as aggressive, as a liar. I was accused of manipulating the public, misleading the media, fabricating the story of what happened to me. I said nothing because I wanted the facts to speak. I wanted the truth to rise on its own. But silence can be mistaken for weakness. And today, I speak not to vindicate myself, but to clarify the depth of what this case really exposes." She turned slightly, looking not just at the judge, but at the audience, the cameras, the jury of public conscience. "I've worked in fiscal oversight. I've written policies. I've testified before Congress. I know the mechanics of these institutions not just as a consumer, but as an architect. I walked into that bank not just with an appointment, but with the full knowledge of how banks assess clients, how algorithms flag accounts, how risk matrices are weaponized through data bias. I didn't reveal who I was because I wanted to be treated like anyone else. Because that is what we claim this country values, equal treatment under the law. And instead, I was treated exactly the way so many others have been, without credentials, without privilege, without the armor of recognition. And it confirmed what I feared, that the system isn't broken. It's built this way." Her voice did not tremble. Her gaze did not waver. "So if now you know my name, and if that name suddenly makes my experience more believable, then I challenge this court and this country to ask itself, why did it take that name for the truth to matter?" The silence that followed was total. No one moved, not even the judge. Outside the courthouse, the clip was already being shared. Within hours, it had become the centerpiece of every news broadcast, editorial headline, and digital forum. Vanessa's past, her policy contributions, her lineage, her silent advocacy. came into focus like a puzzle piece that had been missing from the national conversation. Op-eds flooded the internet. Talk shows aired deep dives into her parents' legacies. Former colleagues, federal economists, retired judges, they all came forward, vouching for her integrity, her brilliance, her quiet decision to serve rather than seek status. And with that revelation came a tidal wave of new pressure on Aldridge Bank. Shareholders demanded emergency meetings. Clients pulled out in droves. Politicians, who had hedged their statements, now took stronger positions. Aldridge's remaining executives were summoned to Washington for inquiry sessions. Behind closed doors, regulatory agencies began drafting legislation for mandatory bias audits in financial institutions. The revelation had turned a civil rights lawsuit into a national reckoning. And Vanessa? She remained steady. She declined interviews for the next 3 days, choosing instead to focus on the motion for oversight audits. Her message was clear. This was never about celebrity or prestige. It was about systems and the people they routinely failed. On the 4th day, she agreed to one interview, an hour-long sit-down with Kayla Booker, filmed in the same office where it all began. Overnight, the hashtag Green Standard flooded social platforms, coined by a civil rights group that reposted her courtroom speech with the caption, "This is how you dismantle a system," with silence turned into strategy. The documentary Kayla had been producing aired nationwide in an uninterrupted primetime slot, drawing the highest viewership the network had recorded in over a year. The program, simply titled Flagged, opened with Vanessa's original incident at Aldridge Bank and then expanded into a searing exposé of banking algorithms, customer risk profiles, and racial bias embedded deep within financial infrastructure. The segment concluded with interviews from former Aldridge employees, one of whom broke down while recalling how many times she had watched people like Vanessa come in fully prepared only to leave humiliated, flagged for reasons no one could clearly justify. After the documentary aired, Congress scheduled hearings. The Senate Banking Committee announced a bipartisan inquiry into data-driven discrimination in financial institutions. Aldridge Bank was the first company subpoenaed, but it would not be the last. The Office of the Comptroller of the Currency issued a preliminary report confirming that Aldridge's internal monitoring system had disproportionately targeted minority clients and had failed to meet federal transparency guidelines. Under pressure from both public and private stakeholders, the bank's board of directors demanded the resignation of CEO Gregory Hensley and 3 other top executives. Their departure was announced in a late Friday press release designed to avoid the news cycle, but it failed. Every major outlet carried the story through the weekend, branding the move as the bank's attempt to staunch a hemorrhage that had already weakened its core. Vanessa watched it all unfold with measured calm. She did not gloat. She did not speak publicly. She continued to meet with her legal team and community leaders, refining the proposed reforms that would accompany her civil suit. The demands are clear. A court-enforced third-party monitor to oversee Aldridge's customer profiling systems for 5 years, a formal public apology issued directly from the board, financial reparations set aside for clients previously flagged under the biased algorithm, and internal diversity and ethics audits with published results. Isaac and Marissa called the proposal both unprecedented and airtight. The bank, facing total collapse in public trust and a steep loss in investor confidence, had no choice but to negotiate. Vanessa received a private message through legal channels from a newly appointed interim CEO requesting a direct meeting. The request was polite, conciliatory, and devoid of the arrogance that had once laced every communication. After careful deliberation, Vanessa agreed to meet under specific terms. The conversation would be recorded, it would be held at a neutral location, and her attorney would be present. The meeting took place in a private conference suite at a neutral law firm downtown. The interim CEO, Maria Lasker, arrived precisely on time, visibly tired but composed, and greeted Vanessa with the kind of quiet respect that only comes from knowing you've inherited a storm someone else created. Maria opened the meeting with a simple acknowledgement. "Ms. Green, the bank failed you. Not just in the moment, but in the systems that allowed the moment to happen." Vanessa responded without posturing. "The bank didn't just fail me. It profiled me, ignored me, and then tried to discredit me. Now you're trying to minimize the damage. Don't confuse that with progress." Maria nodded. "I don't. I came to listen and to begin restoring something you had every right to expect, dignity." The conversation lasted an hour. Vanessa laid out her terms, and Maria did not flinch. By the end of the meeting, there was no handshake, only an agreement in principle. The recording was handed to both legal teams, and within 48 hours, the bank issued its first honest statement. "We acknowledge the harm caused to Ms. Vanessa Green and countless others by policies that were biased in both design and execution. We apologize. We commit to change, and we will be held accountable." The response was immediate. Civil rights organizations praised the statement, but insisted that words must be followed by legally binding actions. Other banks began issuing their own statements, some admitting flaws, others promising reviews. Regulators expanded their investigation scope beyond Aldridge, targeting 3 more institutions based on whistleblower tips and customer complaints inspired by Vanessa's case. A former bank executive from a rival firm contacted Vanessa privately, offering data sets for an upcoming federal audit. "What you started has shaken the ground," he wrote. "They're all scrambling now." Meanwhile, Green Futures experienced an outpouring of public support. Donations surged. Volunteer applications doubled. Vanessa's staff expanded outreach programs into 3 new cities. Schools, advocacy groups, and corporate accountability networks requested her presence on panels, summits, and task forces. Vanessa accepted only a few. She remained focused on the case, determined not to let the movement be diluted by premature celebration. But in the quiet moments between meetings, when she sat alone in her office or walked through the neighborhoods her foundation served, she allowed herself the smallest breath of something rare: relief. Not peace. Not yet. But the knowledge that momentum had shifted, that the impossible task of turning the tide had already begun. And it wasn't just about her anymore. Families she'd never met sent her letters. Mothers wrote of sons denied loans. Entrepreneurs shared how they'd been turned away despite perfect credit. The document didn't name her directly, but the public didn't need the hint. They knew. Overnight, Flag's legal division received over 2,000 new complaints from individuals who had experienced similar treatment. Accounts frozen without cause, loan applications stalled, inexplicable rejections justified only by vague language like risk profile discrepancy or abnormal transaction behavior. Each file added weight to the narrative that what happened to Vanessa was not an anomaly, but a feature of a system too arrogant to think it would ever be held accountable. In response, regulators intensified their investigations, and subpoenas rained down on Aldridge's upper management like a monsoon. Executives were called before congressional committees, forced to sit beneath the sharp fluorescent light of national scrutiny, while footage of Vanessa's incident played behind them on massive monitors, reminding them and the public what this all stemmed from. Under oath, the former CEO tried to distance himself from the algorithmic framework, calling it an inherited tool, a flawed legacy system that hadn't yet been updated. But documents recovered through discovery proved otherwise, showing that under his direction, the risk indicators had been made even more aggressive, with demographic data embedded deeper into the structure under a new euphemism: Client Engagement Index. The revelation cracked open the illusion that these decisions had been accidental. Meanwhile, Clyde Jensen, the man whose hand had gripped Vanessa's arm, whose smug silence had defined the bank's arrogance, found himself cornered not by journalists or protesters, but by prosecutors. Multiple incidents in his personnel file, long buried under HR bureaucracy, now came under review. A former bank client came forward with video footage from 3 years ago, in which Clyde had detained a Latino man over a check deposit, accused him of forgery despite validation from the issuing business, and then threatened police involvement until the client left without his funds. That man had never pressed charges, fearing reprisal, but now, under Vanessa's legal team's guidance, he stepped forward, and his story made headlines. When Clyde was subpoenaed to testify before a civil rights inquiry panel, his legal team requested a delay, citing stress and psychological trauma, but the request was denied. The panel hearing was televised. Vanessa watched it from her office, the live stream muted. her expression unreadable as Clyde squirmed in his chair, evading simple questions, trying to frame himself as a man following orders, a pawn in a larger system. But the footage, the data, and the testimonies contradicted him. One panel member read a direct quote from his Slack messages, recovered during discovery. "These types always try to outtalk you. Don't give them room to argue." The room fell into stunned silence. That sentence would become the tagline of every expose that followed, a shorthand for institutional prejudice clothed in procedure. By the end of the hearing, Clyde had been formally referred for federal investigation under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. Simultaneously, Aldridge's boardroom collapsed into chaos. Investors demanded wholesale restructuring. One by one, the remaining senior officers either resigned or were forced out. Class action attorneys moved swiftly. Flag's data team organized the individual claims into regional batches and filed 5 massive lawsuits in district courts across the country. Each included statistical models, internal documents, and client testimonies, all showing a consistent pattern of racial bias masked by sanitized policy language. Financial watchdogs reviewed the filings and submitted their own reports to Congress. The Federal Reserve issued a statement acknowledging that algorithmic bias had become a systemic threat to consumer equity and proposed sweeping policy reforms. For the first time in decades, real legislative momentum gathered behind financial accountability reform. And at the center of it all stood Vanessa Green, no longer just a symbol of resilience, but a catalyst for reform. She remained grounded, methodical, avoiding the spotlight except when strategy required her voice. She continued to lead Flag, overseeing the construction of a national bias tracking database and a rapid response legal defense network for clients caught in discriminatory practices. She met with legislators, economists, and AI ethicists, drafting guidelines for how data should and should not be used in consumer evaluations. Her work became the basis for a bill introduced in the Senate titled the Fair Algorithmic Practices Act. As the movement she ignited grew beyond even her own initial vision, those who had once tried to erase her now faced consequences not just in court, but in reputation. Franklin DeWitt, the bank's lead attorney during the initial proceedings, was disbarred after an ethics investigation revealed he had knowingly suppressed discovery materials. The conservative news outlet that published the original hit piece about Vanessa retracted the article after a defamation lawsuit gained traction and several anonymous sources recanted under legal pressure. Whistleblowers who had stood by Vanessa received Whistleblower Protection Awards, and one was appointed to the oversight board of the new National Banking Transparency Task Force. In the public sphere, a cultural shift began. Financial institutions updated their customer interface policies. Several launched external reviews of their AI-based client assessments. A few even partnered directly with Flag, eager to be seen on the right side of history. The morning of the first annual Flag Policy Summit arrived with a sky blanketed in soft, overcast light and a quiet that carried the gravity of what the day meant not just for Vanessa Green, but for everyone who had followed her journey, fought beside her, or watched from the margins as an entire system was dragged, piece by piece, into the daylight. The summit was held in Washington, D.C., in the same chamber where only a year before Aldridge Bank executives had been interrogated under oath. Now, the space was transformed, filled with activists, regulators, bankers, students, and formerly silenced victims of financial discrimination. The flag at the summit bore not just the organization's name, but the names of the cities where reforms had taken hold: Atlanta, Detroit, Baltimore, Chicago, Oakland. A thread of progress stitched into the fabric of a country still learning how to confront its own reflection. Vanessa arrived just before the keynote address was scheduled to begin, walking past reporters who didn't shout her name, but instead stepped back respectfully. A subtle shift from spectacle to reverence that told her the narrative had changed because the world had changed with it. She stepped into the hall as the crowd rose in acknowledgement, not applause, just a collective standing that meant something far more than ceremony. She took the stage with quiet grace, standing beneath lights that once illuminated testimony and now lit the face of a woman who had outlasted every attempt to erase her truth. Her voice was steady, shaped by every silence she had once endured. She began not with the story of what happened in the bank, but with a reflection on systems. She told the audience that systems are not brick and mortar or software or policies. They are people. People who make choices, who ignore warnings, who dismiss discomfort because it threatens their comfort, and people who stay silent when their voice might tip the scale. She reminded them that justice does not descend like thunder. It rises like water, slow, patient, and unstoppable when joined by enough rivers. She spoke of Clyde Jensen, not to vilify, but to contextualize. She explained that Clyde had requested a meeting after the lawsuits ended, not through legal channels, but by personal letter. He wrote that he had spent a year in mandatory training, in therapy, in conversations with people who had once been just profiles to him. He had resigned from security work, started volunteering at a nonprofit supporting formerly incarcerated individuals, and had written an apology that was not intended for publication, but for understanding. Vanessa met with him once, in a quiet park in a neutral city, and listened. She didn't excuse him. She didn't absolve him. But she witnessed him. She allowed him to confront the person he had been in her presence. And when he asked what he could do to make it right, she told him simply, truthfully, that making it right wasn't a destination. It was a direction. That one meeting wasn't redemption, but it was a beginning. And perhaps that was enough. She told the summit that the hardest part of the fight was not proving the harm, but believing that change was worth demanding, even when everyone around you insisted it was impossible. She told them about the women who had reached out after the trial, teachers, custodians, analysts, none with famous parents or policy backgrounds, all of whom had been flagged, dismissed, denied, and told they were imagining it. She said those voices were the reason she kept going. The reason Flag would expand into 30 cities by the end of the year. The reason why she still read every letter she received, even the ones that came anonymously. Vanessa's speech closed not with a demand or a declaration, but with an invitation. She asked those in power to see their roles not as positions to protect, but as platforms to listen. She asked those in policy to write laws with lived experience, not abstract projections. And she asked those in the audience who had ever wondered if their story mattered to know that it did, even if no camera ever filmed it, even if no court ever ruled on it. Because the measure of change was not in headlines, but in choices made when no one was watching. After the speech, Vanessa stepped down from the stage and took a seat beside her mother, Nadine Clark Green, who had traveled from their family home in Georgia to witness the culmination of her daughter's quiet revolution. Nadine didn't speak much that day. She held Vanessa's hand and nodded as others came forward, sharing stories, commitments, visions. She smiled when children approached the podium to talk about how they now learned about Flag in school. She laughed quietly when a former banker stood and admitted that Vanessa's case had changed the way he looked at every policy memo he now read. She whispered to Vanessa as the final panel began, "You built something permanent." Elsewhere across the country, the reforms had taken root. Banks began publishing transparent evaluation criteria. Clients now had access to their own risk assessments. Appeals processes were introduced. Artificial intelligence systems in financial institutions were audited quarterly by third-party ethics boards. The Fair Algorithmic Practices Act passed both houses of Congress with bipartisan support, the final bill carrying language drawn directly from Flag's proposals. Clyde Jensen began speaking to community groups, never claiming to be a victim, never claiming redemption, but offering the only thing he had left to give, honesty about his failures. And though not everyone forgave him, some listened. And that was a start. At Green Futures, the foundation Vanessa had founded long before this began, the programs expanded, funded now not just by public donations, but by institutional partners who wanted to learn, not just donate. The offices repaired the broken window long ago, but they left one piece of glass in the front lobby, a shard mounted in a frame, a reminder that the damage was real, and that it had been mended not with money, but with movement. On the one-year anniversary of the federal settlement, Vanessa sat in a quiet studio and recorded a final message, not a victory lap, not a brand expansion, but a meditation on justice. She spoke directly to the camera and said, "Justice is not a reward. It is a return to dignity. It is the restoration of what should never have been denied." She ended the recording with a single line. "We are no longer asking to be seen. We are building what cannot be unseen." That clip aired on every major network and was archived by the Library of Congress as part of a national record on civil rights reform in the 21st century. As the years passed, people continued to cite the Green case in law schools, policy debates, financial regulation symposiums, and activist workshops. It became a template not just for how to fight injustice, but for how to endure, respond, and rebuild without losing sight of humanity. Vanessa never ran for office. She never sold her story for film rights. She chose instead to remain where she had always been, beside those still unheard, still uncertain, still waiting for their moment to stand. Because she knew that change was never about one name, one case, one battle. It was about momentum. And momentum only matters if it moves others. In the final pages of the Flag annual report that year, there was a quote beneath Vanessa's photo, drawn from her own speech. It read, "Justice is the sound of silence breaking, and the echo is what we do with it." The end. If you're finding this story compelling, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I'm curious, what do you think about the plot so far? Has anything surprised you? Let me know in the comments. And tell me where you're watching from. It's always great to see how far these stories reach. Your feedback shapes what comes next.